Pokemon Blue version was the first video game I ever owned. I got it for my 7th birthday alongside Bugs Bunny's Crazy Castle 2 for the Game Boy Color, and I sunk hours of my childhood into those two equally well-designed games. When Generation 2 came out, it was the only thing I asked Santa for, and he delivered, giving me gold and my sister silver, although my sister gave me silver because she didn't like Pokemon. Since then, I've had a lifelong relationship with Mons, although it's definitely been a bit of an on and off one. Sometimes I get super into it, and other times my autistic fixation goes elsewhere and I leave the Pokemon series alone for a few years. But Big Pikachu has his hooks in me, so I always come crawling back eventually. Or at least that's how it used to be. But as of late, I've found myself falling further and further out of love with what used to be one of my favorite game series. And from the performance of my Pokemon videos, it seems like my audience is as well. But honestly, can you blame me? Game Freak hasn't exactly been putting out high quality products as of late. They seem content to coast on their laurels because at the end of the day, Pokemon fans seem willing to buy anything so long as it has a new Charizard form or two. Challenge runs like Zero Experience and Nuzlocke have done a little bit to reinvigorate my interest in the franchise, but even they sort of failed to catch my attention nowadays. So I turned to Pokemon ROM hacks in hopes of reinvigorating my love of the franchise, but I'll be honest, I bounced off the majority of them. Or at least that was the case until recently. Because a few weeks ago, the Too Many Productions team released Mariomon. And this game is really fucking good. Mariomon has a very simple concept. What if all of the Pokemon were instead Mario creatures and enemies? You've got your classic fire, water, grass starters of Babomb, Blooper, and Piranha Plant. You've got the Route 1 normals of Koopa and Goomba. The first egg you get hatches into a baby Yoshi instead of a Togepi, etc, etc. That concept itself is neat enough for a gimmick hack, but Too Many Productions went above and beyond. Not just putting the Mario enemies into Emerald, but creating a whole new world within the Emerald engine. So rather than exploring Johto, Kanto, or Galar, you are exploring the Mushroom Kingdom. And as such, everything has been given a Mario flavor. Potions are now mushrooms, vitamins are beans, your Pokeballs are replaced with the caps from Odyssey, Surf is replaced with a Koopa Shell, Strength is replaced with
Power Glove.
And instead of being a child who wants to get 8 gym badges, you are Mario, trying to get 8 Power Stars before your rival Luigi or the evil Team Bowser does. And while the story does roughly follow the structure that most Pokemon stories do, I would say that Mariomon's story is significantly better written than anything that's come out of Game Freak. Ever. Don't get me wrong, this is still a narrative aimed at children, albeit one that has plenty of Pixar-esque wink at the adult audience moments. But it's a very entertaining, and to be honest, quite funny story that doesn't overstay its welcome the way that overly verbose Pokemon stories often can. And the narrative isn't the only area where Mariomon doesn't overstay its welcome. The game itself is actually pretty short. It took me roughly 10 hours to complete the main story, although that was with me streaming, so if you were playing offline, you could probably do it faster than that. And I think a big part of why this game's runtime is so much shorter than the average mainline Pokemon is they've done a good job trimming the fat or bloat that is often omnipresent in Pokemon campaigns. You still journey from location to location by going through the various routes, now named 1-1, 1-2, 2-1, etc. because of the Mario-esque flavoring, but you are saved from needless backtracking by the Warp Pipe system, where you use the Pipe House to warp between various worlds. And the times where you are actually on the routes, you're engaging with genuinely interesting gameplay mechanics. See, much like the Mario source material, each world has a very concrete theming. For example, World 2 is a cloud world where you need to dodge all these homing missiles and use them to solve switch puzzles. World 5 is a jungle level where you simultaneously control Mario and Captain Toad in order to take advantage of their unique abilities, with Mario jumping and hammering, whereas Captain Toad uses his small size to fit through holes and the Power Glove to push boulders. This not only helps the various worlds feel unique and memorable, but also stops it from feeling as bland as Pokemon environments can. Even when you're in the overworld, you're never just traveling. You're engaging with the various map mechanics and solving puzzles in order to progress through the story. But if you're looking for a very robust experience and you're discouraged by the fact I said the game has a pretty short runtime, don't be, because there is a huge post-game to explore. There are a couple of elusive legendaries that only spawn once you've defeated the Elite Four and Champion, and facilities throughout the Mushroom Kingdom that functionally replicate the Battle Frontier from Emerald's post-game. There's also content here for dedicated shiny hunters, because you can get a shiny of any Pokemon in the game. None of them are shiny locked, including your starters, and the bug around Emerald's shiny starters has been fixed so you can soft reset to try to get a sparkly blooper, piranha plant, or bomb to your heart's content. And once you access the post-game, you're able to get all 151 captures without assistance from any sort of outside cartridge or trading. That's right, you can catch the starters in the post-game. And you can even breed additional copies of the starters or even legendaries in the daycare. In fact, the devs really went above and beyond when it comes to supporting the daycare features. Not only did they include their own version of Ditto in Duplighost and allow for legendary breeding, but they also allowed for same-sex breeding. That's right, you can do Mpreg in Mariomon. And each Mariomon has their own set of egg moves, which is the sort of thing that most players aren't going to run into, but is just really cool that the team was dedicated enough to design. But as much as I love the overworld and the post-game, the core of a Pokemon experience is battling and collecting your Pokemon. And as such, I think the strength of Mariomon is on its roster. The dev team limited themselves to 151 captures, and while I've seen some people criticize this, I actually think it was a very wise decision. For a dex that is entirely made up of new Pokemon, limiting the scope to 151 is good to stop it from being overwhelming from players who are trying to figure out the various type matchups and who they want their teammates to be. Game Freak themselves has never gone above 156, which was the number that they added in Gen 5. Still, the upper limit on captures does mean that they weren't able to include literally every Mario enemy. But it didn't stop the team from including quite a few very deep cuts. You get the standards of Goombas, Koopas, Cheep Cheeps, and Bullet Bills, but these are complemented by more obscure enemies like Beanies from Mario & Luigi, the Uproot from Odyssey, the Fighter Fly from the original Mario Bros. Arcade game, Histocrat from Mario 3D World, X-Knots from TTYD, and even one of the ghosts from Luigi's Mansion. There is one area that feels notable by its absence, and that is Super Mario RPG, since there's only one capture associated with that game, and it is reserved to the post-game. This feels like a little bit of an oversight, since RPG had some of the most unique enemies in the franchise, and while I personally didn't really care for that game, I do think it's a bit of a shame that none of their cast made it in, although I assume part of the reason for this was simply the limitation of only 151 slots. In order to cram in so many references, the team made some pretty economical choices. For example, Bullet Bills and Homing Bills were both included. Homing Bills were just the shiny variation of Bullet Bills. Similarly, all three viruses from Dr. Mario made the cut, but they are considered to be alternate forms of each other, similar to Rotom. And they're not the only Pokemon with multiple forms. Histocrat changes appearance depending on its gender, as either a king or a queen. Fuzzies don't evolve, but instead have schooling, so you can get a Fuzzy Swarm on your team as a sort of pseudo-evolution like Wishy-Washy. And Hammer Bro is this game's forecast Pokemon, changing between Hammer Bro, Boomerang Bro, Fire Bro, and Ice Bro depending on the weather. And his signature move of Hammer Throw becomes a Boomerang Throw in the rain, a Fireball in the sun, and an Ice Ball in the hail. Or rather, snow. Because this game does use mostly Gen 9 mechanics, although the freeze status has been replaced by frostbite because, let's be honest, freeze is a really shit status. And removing it was the best thing that Legend Arceus added to the series. But that's not the only way Mariomon improves on the Pokemon formula, because the game adds a number of huge quality of life changes. Navigation is made significantly easier due to an infinite use escape rope and a warp pipe to travel from location to location. Even when moving around manually, you can use repels to stop getting into encounters, and you will be asked to re-up instead of having to go into the menu every time it expires. If you don't like grinding, there is the optional Content Creator mode, which you can activate by talking to an NPC in the Poke Center, where you will get infinite money and the infinite candy, alongside the cap candy, which will raise all of your Pokemon to the current level cap. And these level caps are also related to the options you get upon starting a new game file. You can enable level caps if you want, which prevents you from being able to level up above the highest level Pokemon of the next gym leader. And if you're a more hardcore gamer, you can also enable Nuzlocke mode, complete with a bunch of optional clauses like the Shiny Clause and the Duplicate Clause. You can even determine whether or not blacking out means game over for your Nuzlocke. Although there is one piece of quality of life that is meaningfully absent, and that is the QoL patch that displays enemy Pokemon types in battle. On the one hand, I can understand the idea of approaching this from a more casual perspective and trying to figure out typings as you go through the campaign, but on the other hand, when every single Mariomon in the game is new, it can become difficult to remember or even figure out what their typings are if you're facing them down, which does make for a bit of a frustrating experience from a Nuzlocking perspective. In my playthrough, I definitely lost a few powerful Pokemon just to not knowing what the opposing Pokemon's typing was, especially since a few of the typings are pretty unintuitive. There is an external document you can use to look up every Pokemon's type, but I've never found external resources to be an adequate replacement for simply having QoL in the game. It's the same way that I feel about growth rates in Fire Emblem. I don't want to end on a negative note, however, because this game is so fun to play, so I want to briefly touch upon the difficulty. For me, the difficulty of Mariomon hits that perfect sweet spot of Pokemon difficulty. A lot of custom Pokemon hacks go above and beyond than the difficulty, presenting challenges like slacking and neutralizing gas, or weather and terrain that you can't turn off that benefits your opponent. And for the sort of people who crave these hardcore challenges, I think that's awesome. But personally, I get really turned off by these Kaizo difficulties. I'm looking for something that is more challenging than mainline Pokemon games, but not so hard that the New York Times will write an article about you for being the first one to beat it. And Mariomon fits this to a T. Boss fights tend to have very balanced teams and smart moveset plus item combinations, while at the same time not being such an overwhelming force that they feel insurmountable to the average player. It feels around the difficulty level of Black and White 2 Challenge Mode, if you've ever played those games. The team does eventually intend to release a more difficult version of Mariomon called Difficulty Mode, which will probably crank things up further, but for now, I really like the way the normal mode's difficulty is sitting at. But that's all I've got to say about Mariomon. If you haven't played it yet and you are interested in Mario, Pokemon, or both, you should definitely go check it out. It is a blast. Definitely the best Pokemon game I've played in a very long time. Thank you to my patrons, including Eris, Len, Gameboo, Karosa, Fyrant, Your Doctor, Guiji555, Smaz Ruby, Zycrom, Robin D, Alenby, Hound Dogs, Girl Boss, Lizard Bongwater, Christopher Bueno, Marin McLean, Jaden, Shadow, Calamity Callie, Thaythom, Andu, Reflect, A Clever Username of Lies, Jackson McMahon, Electric Giga, Erica Ford, YLO1, George Grenville the 7th PM, Jamie Collins, Thick Molder, Arvis, Tailored Muffin, Floahay, Faulty Videos, Lyra, Kyle Madison, Derek Williams, Just Riley, Anna Cabana, Some Trades, The Daily Fugle, Faye, Sardonic Muse, Dysike, Ginger, Root Beer Pants, Queen Eliza, Aerith Emblem, Adele, Gabe the Green, Control Tagus, Roman Kormancic, Nick Knack Hammersmack, SUP, Caius Cole, Heistiklop, Bree, Punch Fighter Champion, Eggman, Maxine the Vampire Queen, and especially my Jakins, Toaster But Really, Elizabeth, Shermie's Wife, and Bethany. If you want to support the channel, there's a link to my Patreon below, but please only do so if you can comfortably afford to donate. I don't want anyone going broke over Fire Emblem, or Pokemon, or Mariomon. With that being said, I hope you have a wonderful day. Stay safe, gamers.